everyone, I'm Sarah Lang, and I'm here to spark the Philanthropy Revolution. The word philanthropy means love of mankind. My show is all about the ways we can revolutionize our fundraising so we can raise more money and do more good. Hey everybody, Sarah Lang here. Happy summer. I can't believe we're hurtling towards the end of July. Thanks for joining me today. I am a professional fundraiser who's raised over $100 million and worked with over 200 nonprofits. And this show is really about teaching you how to raise more money so you can do more good. And today, I am super excited to have as our guest Dr. Dan Young. And Dan and I know each other. He is the founder of TEDx Wilmington, which is one of the largest TEDx franchises in the country. And I was lucky enough to be there this past April and hear some amazing presentations, and hope to go next year as well. And hopefully next year I'll be on stage. And Dan has his fingers in many pies, and you can learn all about it. Dan, welcome to the show, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself to everybody.
Well, thank you for having me, Sarah. It's really great to be here with someone that I look up to in the philanthropy world like you. So thank you very much.
Thank
My name's
you.
No problem. My name's Dan Young. I'm from here in sunny Wilmington, Delaware, and I actually started my career in financial services as a financial advisor, and I was lucky enough to sell my practice when I was 35 and have some options about what I wanted to do. And I ended up going back to school to get a doctorate in marketing, but I really focused my work on social and behavioral marketing, specifically to help nonprofits. So my dissertation, which is called An Examination of Digital Nativity, Generation, and Gender in Online Giving, was completed back in 2012. And the easy way I can think of it is I was trying to figure out how to get millennials to donate more money to me impulsively. Obviously, the world has changed exponentially in the last 12 years. And I started my doctoral program in 2005, and it's obviously changed incredibly exponentially since 2005. So I was really just trying to crack the code of why some nonprofits had such a hard time having, at that point in time, what we considered the youngest generation to give dollars to them. And so I ended up being a professor and teaching and an administrator for 20 years. I ended my career as a director at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. And now, as Sarah mentioned, most of my time is in doing different projects like TEDx, being a fractional chief marketing officer, and being a co-founder and investor in a couple different startups. So on top of that, I'm married. I have 6 children, 3 dogs, and I try to keep myself busy.
Yeah, you try to keep yourself busy. Sounds to me like you're already very busy.
Always busy, but I can honestly say there's not one thing I do that I don't like doing. So that's a blessing.
That's awesome. So let's start out by defining millennials for those folks who are in the audience who don't know them, don't really understand when they were born. What are some of the hallmarks of the generation?
Yeah. I think what's interesting when you get into the research, researchers have said the millennial generation can start as early as people being born in 1979 or as late as people being born in 1982. Really, the major piece that we think about is the fact that every millennial is someone who is a digital native, which means that they started their K through 12 education with access to the internet. That's the major difference. The major difference is this ability to learn from screens more than you're learning from people. So the average millennial, at the time of my research, had less than 5,000 hours of actually reading like tangible books, and more than 10,000 hours of video watching from screens. So this is really the first generation that we encountered what we call the three screen problem, where they constantly were on the phone, the laptop, and had the and had the television set on at the same time. And what we found is these had a lot of impacts on actually how their brains worked. When you looked at MRIs of millennials compared to people in earlier generations, their brains were shaped differently. They produced different chemicals. They worked completely differently. And so, because of this reprogramming of the human brain, most of everything that happened with millennials happened at a faster speed. In education, we'd always say, kids weren't paying attention in class. Well, we just weren't teaching fast enough, and we weren't providing enough screens for them to see in our teaching. So, in general, to answer, I'm a Scorpio, so I'm long-winded. In general, most people would say that millennials are those who were born somewhere between 1982 and year 2000.
All right. I just learned a lot. It's funny because my son was born in 1996, and he used to tease me sometimes as he got into middle school and high school about how, there were certain things that I just didn't really get, and I'd just hand things to him and go, "Fix this, figure this,
Mhm.
show me how to do this." And I tried to help him understand, like, the first time I touched a computer, I was 22. I was, typing my senior
Mhm.
thesis at my boyfriend's apartment, and his housemate came home and said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm typing my thesis." He goes, "No, what are you doing?" And he took me up to the computer center on the hill, which I didn't even know existed. So here it is, my last semester, my senior year of college, and I'm just learning how to use a computer. And I
Mhm.
said to him, I said, "You started using a computer when you were 3. Like, this is your first language. For me, it's like probably my third language, but um, yeah, I hadn't really thought about the whole screen thing. I'm sure I must have bored my students at Clark University to tears with my old school approach.
Yeah, I always say
Um,
I kind of came up in maybe the absolute worst time for the internet, meaning that I graduated from college in 1997, which is really the first widespread use of what we kind of consider graphical user interface of websites, right? So when I was a freshman in college, we had this new crazy wacky technology called email,
yeah.
and just the concept that you could hang out with a girl like one night in college and like be able to reach out to her like on the other side of campus without making a phone call was like phenomenal. And so by the time I graduated, and people were creating websites, buying webs URLs on GoDaddy, we were just kind of like going off in the world thinking that oh, this website thing may be a big deal. I don't know. So it's very interesting because I'm old enough where I got to use email, but young enough where I don't really remember not using it in a way. We still did basic in high school, like all that fun stuff. But it is a very interesting time to grow up. And so whenever I meet anyone who's younger than me, and they're like, "You don't know how to code in HTML?" It's like, "Nah, I just missed that. No clue
I
about
know,
that."
right?
So
Yeah.
yeah,
And now I'm trying to wrap my brain around Chat GPT. I'm like, what?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the things that you learned about millennials and the nonprofits that were kind of able to actually capture their attention and engagement?
Well, I mean, one of the things to always remember, and this is pretty much what anyone who has a PhD will tell you, right? In the research, it was very specific in terms of what we were looking at because we can't look at everything. So the first thing that I researched was just the difference between digital natives, those people who grew up their entire academic life with the internet, and digital immigrants like myself and you, who basically we had to get indoctrinated into that later. So what I found in the research was that there are significant differences. And once again, I always have to make sure I preface that this is research that I defended my dissertation in 2012. So some of the viewers will think, "Oh, no, duh," like obviously, but keep in mind, when this was done beforehand, this was like the cutting edge stuff, right? So obviously, we found that there are very different ways that these groups engaged with and trusted online platforms. We found that different groups had different definitions of altruism in terms of what altruism meant to them, and they had their own unique motivations and behaviors. And then we also had groups had different definitions of their parents' altruism. So, what does this mean practically? The first thing that it means is that a lot of nonprofits at the time, and after I defended my dissertation, I kind of went on some level of like a road show to nonprofits to talk about how they're engaging. The first thing that meant is that you need to, on your website, have two different offers or make your offer in two different ways. With anyone who's a digital immigrant, someone, let's say, older than a millennial, they were more likely to give impulsively based on mission, right? So if I have someone in my family who's affected by cancer, then I will then give to the American Cancer Society. In terms of millennials, they were more interested in affiliation. So a good example here in Delaware, like a lot of places, we have the multiple sclerosis, like MS, Bike to the Bay. Most of the people who participate in that are millennials, and most of them do not know what multiple sclerosis is or can even spell multiple sclerosis. They just want the affiliation of being part of something together. So that was one piece that I discovered. The other piece I discovered is this concept that people who are digital immigrants are more interested in offline and local contribution. So when I was growing up, I would go with my dad to the Sunday breakfast mission and feed food to people. And that was my definition of altruism, offline and local. Whereas millennials and younger were more interested in online and global. So that's the reason why there can be a typhoon in Haiti, and Wyclef Jean or like Austin Kutcher says, "Hey guys, you should give." People don't even know where Haiti is, but they're more likely to give to that than they might be to their local Sunday breakfast mission. Also, for people who are digital immigrants, our contribution, our altruism, usually had to be some level of hands-on, time-consuming, where millennials and younger felt as though their altruism could very simply be pressing a button and giving. And there are similar levels of altruism that were displayed from both people. So nonprofits, when they created their website, most of them clearly, especially in the early 2010s, they would spend a lot of time talking about mission. And what I found was when millennials reviewed those websites, they were not likely to make an impulse online donation. However, if I basically said, "Hey, listen, pause for people. We help people, give to dogs here in the state of Delaware. But if every single state gave saved this many dogs, there are this many more dogs in the world," got way more interest. And you know this from being an expert in philanthropy yourself. If we can assign what's called an attitude object to something, then it's way easier for us to give. So when both you and I were probably growing up, especially in the 80s, you'd see one TV commercial that says, "Hey, there's 3 million starving kids in Africa." And that would get a certain number of donations. But always got more donations was Sally Field in Africa saying, "Hi, this is Johnny. Johnny's starving. Will you give to Johnny?" Always got multiple of 10x of the donations because we could easily assign an attitude object to what we were given to. And what I found is most nonprofits, they didn't think through these things on a website to give both the attitude object, but also to talk about the mission of the organization.
That's so interesting because obviously I come from my own points of reference, and um, I think it's really interesting that millennials, and it makes sense given that they're digital natives, that it would just be secondhand to them to just push the button. And I know that you know even my son, who's not necessarily a millennial, but he'll get a text and he'll be like, oh, "Okay, there's a tsunami in wherever. Ding, here's $10." And that's and I always tried when he was younger. So interesting looking at kind of historic tackle events through a different lens. Yeah, he and I used to go volunteer at Heifer Farm. So Heifer Farm distributes animals both locally and globally, um, to help people,
Yes.
improve their quality of life. So we happen to have the Northeast Education Center of Heifer Farm about half an hour from our house. So we used to go there all the time to like feed the animals, take care of the gardens, and he enjoyed that up to a certain point, but at some point, I think he was probably like 9 or 10 years old. He's like, "Why can't we just give money?"
Yep.
Like he didn't want to go and muck stalls and slop the pigs and um yeah, weed the
Now,
garden. He was
what's
yeah,
funny?
he was
What's
just
I was,
kind of
I was gonna say
done.
what's funny is I talked about Heifer International in my dissertation, and their website was incredibly compelling, especially back in 2012. I probably haven't looked at it since then. But back then, they would basically, similar to what you're saying, they would have a page that says, one cow is $2,000. One chicken is $50. And they would have a way for you to share that link with multiple people. So I even found one group of kids at the University of Delaware. One story I got from someone was like, yeah, like one night we came back from the bar, we were all toasted. We went on Heifer International, we bought a cow. Like it was phenomenal. and the fun and then the fun but here's the funny thing. The funny thing about it is at least back then, at the very bottom of the Heifer International page, it would say with a little asterisk with little super small like pharmaceutical writing, yeah, we don't actually buy cows. We don't buy chickens. But that thousand, that is the monetary representation of what it would be to buy one for this particular place. So they figured out a way to have an attitude object cow have a dollar amount, $1,000, that a lot of people cannot afford who are younger, but giving the opportunity to share the link with people to buy the cow. And if you think about it, even now we see this type of work with many things. In fact, I just went to the wedding of one of my former students, and she had a great registry with a bunch of stuff that no one could afford. But you basically could share the link with other people and say, "Oh yeah, $4,000 for like a super awesome like wine fridge," and it would show how many people donated to that one and the amount of money left. And as we all probably know, like mom and dad, once right before the wedding's over, they'd probably check to say, "Okay, well, there's $200 left for this one, $100 left for this one, $500 left for this one. Let's just fill those out so the kids get all the stuff that they're looking for." It's You now see that type of strategy in all kinds of different places.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's funny that, we end up talking about heifer because one of the things we used to do was we would save all this loose change for a while. And then, oh, we lost you there, Dan. It looks like you're
Oh,
talking,
you
but
still
we're
there?
not hearing you. Oh, there you
Oh,
are.
oh, there you go. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Um, no, so what I was saying is, we used to save up all our loose change from turning in bottles, things, and then we would actually buy like whatever animal that changed. So we'd save it up all year, and then right before Christmas, we buy like a flock of chickens or whatever it was, a goat, a third of a goat. So it was a very effective strategy, I'll tell you.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you definitely always
Yeah.
read the small print, but that ability to create communities with digital natives is huge. Especially post COVID, where all you had was your online community. I remember getting into a whole conversation with my 16-year-old, and obviously at the time he was 12 years old, and I was talking about the amount of times he spent playing video games. It's not great, and I'll never forget him like very like tearfully looking at me and saying, "But Dad, this is where all of my friends are." And I was just like, "Oh shoot, you got me there." And then he went back on to playing like Call of Duty or whatever. But it post COVID, if nonprofits have not fully integrated the lessons that we learned from communication in COVID, you're clearly missing out on a lot of funding. And the lessons of COVID were super clear in terms of online outreach, online payment structures, the importance of subscription-based models, the importance of like ongoing giving instead of one-time gifts. We learned a ton there, and what I find is because the needs of the community from nonprofits were so great, many of them did not have the time or did not give themselves the time to work on the business while they're working in the business. But any strategic planning session now with a nonprofit should really take a look at, doing a very clear digital audit, setting goals about what you want these things to look like, training and developing a digital team, and then just updating your web-based approach and your social media-based approach, and then putting in measurement structures to see how those numbers increase. Anyone who's not doing this is really missing out on that opportunity.
So, for those people who are now sitting on the other side of this screen, going, "Oh my God, we have to do this," how does one go about doing a digital audit? Like, what does that look
Well,
like?
Well, I mean, obviously, it looks a little bit different for everyone, right? I mean, all the digital audit means is just really taking a look at your online presence and seeing if a lot of it's maybe like a lot of focus group work, getting a number of people onto a call of different generations. Every day in this, obviously, everyone's read all these different features about, the greatest transfer of wealth in human history that's going to happen as, you know, traditionalists and baby boomers leave the job market and in some cases leave the planet, and give these
Yeah,
dollars to people. And then also on the other side of that, because of digital technology, we get about 1,700 new millionaires every day, and the fastest growing tranche of millionaires are people the ages of 13 to 21. So you not
that's
only have
insane.
it is.
That's crazy pants.
Also keep in mind that the things that are important to these folks in terms of these young people, in terms of wealth, in terms of riches, in terms of all those things, are not the same things that are important to people who are my age or older. So they're certainly not going to country clubs. They may or may not be buying Mercedes. They may not be investing in real estate. They're just buying tons of clothes and tons of stuff. And so it doesn't really necessarily pop up on the wealth and luxury indices that we tend to see. But people need to think through the fact that these young people are going to be getting all this money from the wealth transfer. Also, they are making all this money, and they're engaging with digital technology in a new way. So basically, you always, from the digital audit, you want to take a look at your website, social media presence, email marketing, and just kind of assess the mobile friendliness of what you have, um, the user experience. Are you including any sort of gamification in what you're doing? And the easiest way to do that is just by simply getting a number of people in the virtual room, that are in the different generations, and this is crazy pants to some people, and having a conversation with them, looking at the website and
What?
looking at the social media to say, hey, will this get you to give impulsively? Will this get you to give today? That's the important thing. Because if you go to like a 20-year-old and say, hey, American Cancer Society, would you give to that? Who's going to say no? Like like absolutely not. Like of course they're going to say yes, but what would get you to give today? And then from that, setting very clear, smart goals. Everyone knows what that means at this point. Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound goals. Um, about how you want to improve digital engagement and how you want to improve fundraising. So, for example, can we increase online giving by 20%? Can we increase social media followers by 30%? Can we increase website conversion ratio by 15%? Whatever that looks like for you. So, it's a little bit different for everybody, but it really is just basic marketing research, focus groups and surveys, and then making those changes to make sure that your site um, reaches out to each of your constituents in the way that you want them to reach out. they want to be reached out to.
Yeah, I I find everything you're saying so interesting, and it's so in alignment with my whole thinking and approach. But um, when I talk to people about their website, and I'm working with somebody right now, and I was talking to them about that donations page, and they serve kids, right? So you know, kids are like very easy to give to. They're very compelling. You put a little picture of a little kid saying, "I love coming to this place." Like
Yeah.
the heartstrings, right? They're in the top three: kittens, puppies, and kids, right?
Yes.
And so I'm looking, there's no photographs of these adorable kids, right?
Hmm.
There's lots of text. It's not quite as bad as the pharmaceutical inserts, but it's not much bigger than that.
Right.
And then there's like three different calls to action, all of which pull you off the page. It's
Right.
like, and there's resistance when things like that get brought to people's attention and there need to be changes, and they're like, well, we want to make sure everybody knows about everything. I'm like, okay, but now they know nothing about anything because
Correct.
their attention is being split, and the confused mind says no.
Correct.
So just
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the major issues with marketing in general. People have a very hard time niche marketing because they believe someone's being left behind. But in reality, the stronger your niche market is, the more likely they are to refer other people because they feel as though you're talking directly to them. So all target
right.
markets have to be defined demographically, geographically, psychographically, and behaviorally. Psychographically and behaviorally are the most important ones because for the most part men and women both give, right? Kamala does a conference call, she gets 1.3 million donors who are men, 1.3 million dollars from men, 1.4 million dollars from women. Both of them gave, like when she did her conference calls to raise money. But psychographically deals with someone's attitude, interests, and opinions and their social class. Behaviorally talks to when is someone likely to give during the day, what do they do as a family member, what do they do as a husband, wife, grandmom, granddad. You want to target your web page to specific types of people, right? So when I'm creating a web page to try to get impulse online donations by millennials, I'm going to have the big obnoxious button that says give now to change the world. Like I'm going to say like, hey, some people don't believe that we can do this, but we can. You have to have very specific um, language in your offer to people, right? And
Mhm.
that offer has to have specificity. It has to have clarity. It has to have actionability and resonance and familiarity, otherwise known as the scarf method. Like you have to construct it. And I think the problem with a lot of people now who are using AI, they're getting a very, very vanilla um, content when what you really wanted was Rocky Road, or at least Chubby Hubby. And
Yeah.
so I think that is part of the strategic planning piece to basically say to yourself, hey, listen, there's a lot of different people who are raising money for a lot of different things. We want to corner the market on impulse fundraising for this person. And in doing that, if you're online, you will not only pull in that person, but you'll pull in their family members because they see how like fired up like the person who gave to you is. And also to touch on something that you mentioned before, because it's not what you said, but it's something that I thought of when you said it. Yes, kids and puppies and ice cream, people want to give to that, obviously. But if you have something that's a little bit more um, difficult to imagine, you have to then create some sort of a magnet. So, for example, if you think of the ice bucket challenge with ALS, most of the people who
Yep.
gave to that have no idea what ALS is, nor can they spell ALS, nor they know what's going on. All they know is they dumped a bucket of water on their heads and they called people out, but they still raised money. So, if you have something that's the type of thing that what I would call an unsought like charity, like anything that's dealing with, in some cases, cancer, Alzheimer's, ALS, things of that nature, you know that you're going to have something that pulls people in that may have nothing to do with the charity. So on the website, you can tell everything that you want about ALS. Here's what we're doing. But in social media, to get the views, you might have to have something that's a little bit more viral to get people to the website and to say, hey, listen, for millennials and Gen Z especially, hey, I will give just because that was a kick-ass marketing campaign, because they will do that. So it's
Oh
really
yeah.
important to think through those different pieces there when you're talking about the target market, and having something for everyone to be able to give impulsively.
Yeah. And I think all those points are so valid, and just through my own experience, what I know to be true. Um somebody wanted to do their own version of the bucket challenge, but they wanted to do it with like high school kids. And
Hmm.
so it was like they were talking about love bombing, like with a bucket. And I was just like thinking, high school kids, you know, throwing buckets of stuff over each other. I'm thinking nails, glass, maybe some dog poop. I'm thinking, no, wrong group to do this with. I'm just thinking about how my son was in middle school and high school, and I'm like, no, no. But I mean, as my mother
Yeah.
used to say, bless their hearts, because they were
Yes.
trying to think of something that was attention grabbing. And but yeah, I think we all have to think about like liability and safety in these days as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that everything like, just like you mentioned, everything goes back to the target market, right? Because the ice bucket challenge had a couple different pieces to it. When you deconstruct it, it says why it went viral, right? So, and all these different things deal with demographics, geographic, psychographic, and behavior. The first thing was, for the most part, the Ice Bucket Challenge really began and took shape in Boston. When a Boston College, I believe a Boston College baseball player had gotten ALS, and some of his teammates rallied around him with the Ice Bucket Challenge, because guess what? In the locker room, where do you have? You have ice. Thankfully, they did not do the Icy Hot Challenge, which
Right.
most of us who've been in the locker room, we know what the Icy Hot Challenge is.
Yeah.
But
No.
but what they,
Another
but
bad idea, right?
don't do that one.
Don't do this as
Um,
a fundraising strategy.
Correct. But part of the genius of it, without them knowing is genius, those of us who understand that there are probably only three places in the United States that are fanatical, not like where you're from, blah blah blah. They're fanatical about where they're from, are Texas, Manhattan, and Boston. So it became a Boston pride thing in a city that is really a collection of small neighborhoods. So the virality of it took off because, being in Boston, other Bostonians wanted to participate. Then, because it was a sports team, the Patriots got involved, the Bruins got involved, the Red Sox got involved. Then when that happens, everyone in Philly is like, "Oh, wait a minute. We're better in Boston. We can do this." And then people in New
No,
York
you're
are like,
not.
"We're better in Boston. We can do this." Hey, listen, I'm outside Philly. Yes, we are. And so that added to the virality, but also the thing that added to the virality is that it was just enough pain, right? It's like just enough. It's like you're not putting yourself, it's not like an icy hot challenge. You're just in enough pain for a short amount of time where it became a thing. And it was just uncomfortable enough for other people to watch, to keep their attention. So for something to become viral, it depends on where it starts. It depends on what the network is. It depends on the pain level. One of the most one of the podcasts that's so popular now is having celebrities and they're eating hot wings, right? And
Oh,
they ask them all these questions while they're eating hot wings, and they're like trying to answer the question about what's it like to work with The Rock, and like, people like just sweating, like, oh my god, like it was awesome. Can I please have some milk? It's like, no, I have some more questions. You just have to have just enough pain and uncomfortability for something to be viral. TikTok, why? Because grandma's dancing in front of other people, and grandma never danced in front of people before. Just enough uncomfortability, just enough pain, just enough outreach so that it becomes viral and people think, okay, that's interesting. So these are the things nonprofits need to think about when they're like, oh, we'll just make this thing and it'll go viral. That's not how it works. There's a very specific formula to be able to do something to make it go viral, and it all deals with who the target market is and where the virus is starting from.
Yeah, yeah. Again, so many really good, solid points. I want to go back to something you were saying a little bit earlier about this huge transfer of wealth that's happening. And, so many times nonprofits are under tapping their market. And I think part of it is just individual donor work is akin to dating. It takes time, it takes investment. Like, you can't just ask somebody to marry you on the first date. Like, you got to take them to coffee and then work your way up to lunch and then maybe dinner and then maybe the weekend away. So, it doesn't have to be like the slog fest with each donor, but you have to figure out, how do I draw this donor in? How do I engage them? And you can't use the same techniques or approach with every single donor. So, again, it has to be kind of customized stewardship. But the other thing that I find so interesting that you said, which also totally attaches to this huge transfer of wealth and who's getting it, is when somebody gets really fired up and engaged, that fire spreads through their community, right? So
Yes.
63% of people give to causes recommended by their friends, families, coworkers, and networks, right? So
Yes.
it's not just that people see them getting fired up. It's like they're looking for good causes. And if they see that you're fired up about this cause, they're gonna be like, oh, tell me more about this. And then they're gonna turn and donate, right? So the more you niche down and target your market, the better you're going to have in terms of the spreadability, because people are going to be deeply engaged and more fired up and more willing to talk about it with friends and families and their networks, which in turn boosts donations instead of just trying to be vanilla, right? So I was always taught in business, you want a red flag or a green flag, right? You want people to be like, yes, or
Yes.
no, right? You
Yes.
never want that yellow flag, which is meh. Like, you want to
100%.
incite, yeah, you want to incite either a strong yes or a strong no. And I think so many nonprofits, like you said earlier, are afraid to like leave the middle ground, but really you want those red and green flags. You want to be super clear about, here's who we are for, right? Here is what we're for, right? And so
Mhm.
people can gravitate towards that. Or if they don't relate to that at all, they're going to go find another nonprofit anyway. So you might as well niche down, because it's going to draw in a specific customer base that you're looking for.
Very true. I mean, I think in general, in the perfect world, if you're a nonprofit that produces a good or a service, you don't in many ways you don't want anyone to even care if you're a nonprofit. Like, you just want someone to basically claim like, hey, that's my thing, that's going on, right? And I think that you're 100% right, and it lends itself, and I think it's worth reiterating, it lends itself to the importance of understanding the behavior of your target market. There was a great business 4 years ago, that was obviously slanted to the Democratic Party, that was really looking to have President Biden elected. Actually, it was a little bit before the last election, and they created a series of easy buttons. And you could click the easy button on your desk, and every time, at the time when Donald Trump was president last, every time he said something crazy, you'd like slam the easy button and automatically sent $5 to the Democratic Party.
That's
And so
genius.
people, and so people were just like listening to this guy, like while he's probably just like, it's like mother, like just like hitting the easy button. It's like that was easy, $5. That was easy, $5. And and that is like an unbelievable example of understanding behavior of a target. And so I think that the more that you can really, really delve into it, any sort of, for example, American Cancer Society can say, hey, here's what we want to do. Understanding that every nonprofit, your job as a nonprofit executive director is to put yourself out of a job, because like whatever you're advocating for does not exist anymore. I think a lot of people don't go that far. I think a lot of them aren't like taking a step back and saying, okay, how can I be out of a job in 10 years? What has to happen, at what level, at what speed? Now, Who are the people I need to get 100% of to buy into this? And I target them. Most people, like you said, are playing very much in the middle. They say basically, if you have a wallet and a heartbeat, we'll take your money. But what I would say to those folks is, okay, but if you have to keep going back for grant funding every year for 5 years straight, you are probably doing something wrong. I'll say it's like the blanket statement that anyone can disagree with, because you have more than welcome to disagree with it. But unless you're providing some sort of value to somebody, then you're not going to service all the people you want to service from your nonprofit. So this laser focus on target marketing should be a part of everybody's strategic planning process with every nonprofit.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of like future visioning and then reverse engineering and figuring out what the
Yep.
dollar amount and the plan is. Like, okay, great. Here's where the train is. Here's the destination of the future. What do the tracks need to look like? And what's the train we need to build? Is it a bullet train? Is it a steam train? Is, like what kind of train are we building? And, there's so many times when people are just going from one year to the next and they're not thinking of 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And I think some of that is, more than 60% of the nonprofit sector is bringing in less than $1 million a year. Like that's a micro institution. So I think for a lot of nonprofits, sometimes they don't even think that's possible, but that's what I love to do is play with them and say, oh, but it is possible. Like there was over $500 billion given away last year. Like, let's get you some of that,
Yeah.
And it's not that the money's not out there. It's just that people don't know how to go after it and get it. And this comes back to what you and I have been talking about is, this is how you go get it. You create these digital environments where people can come in and maybe buy the cow together, right? Whether they're wasted or not, or you have to understand who your target market is and what experience are they having when they come into your world, and what's their experience when you go out to their world. One of the things I love doing with my clients is donor surveys, because that's how you get inside the brain of your donor, right? And so I love to ask donors, could you give me 5 words to describe yourself as a donor? And then literally I tell the directors of development, use those words. Like, because then you create the resonance, right? Which ups the engagement level. Then you're like literally creating, oh, we're on the same wavelength. I'm like, so create a word cloud of your donors' favorite words and then start using them. We know how generous you are. We know how kind you are. We know how much community matters to you. Like literally, I don't care what words you want to use their words, Yeah, because otherwise it just ends up being like a missed opportunity because you're talking in a different way than they are listening and hearing. So yeah, I think that's so important.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that overall, there, for whatever reason, there's been a very big chasm between, like I mentioned, the post-COVID economy, a lot of which is kind of some level of like a gig economy where people have said, hey, I don't want to drive into work anymore, or I want to work from the beach all the time. And some of those time saving and, more importantly, like spirit saving activities, I found that most nonprofits went back to business as usual. And like,
Yep.
yes, our fundraiser is to have the annual dinner, and our way of doing it is government grants and $10,000 donors or $500,000 donors. And I think nonprofits, once again, because we're so couched in the mission, we are always working in the business as opposed to on the business. But this is why 13-year-olds can figure out how to make $1 million faster than a nonprofit with 50 employees can. So these are opportunities to collaborate and talk to each other and get best practices. Because once again, when nonprofits do well, the world is a better place.
Absolutely. You and I agree 100% on that because, people sometimes think, oh, government is the answer or corporations are the answer, but there's so many groups and situations that neither of those entities want to take on and they won't. So, I often will say, if you think about the quality of life in the United States, it really comes down to nonprofits that are affording us
Hmm.
this quality of life. Because if you stop and think about our country without any 501c3s in it, right? Now you're talking about no hospitals, no universities, no social services, no adult daycare, no like animal rescue,
Right.
no environmental. Okay, well, let's all move to Siberia because it's probably less hostile than this country would be if we took out all the 501c3s. Yet, I think part of the reason that 501c3s have a hard time dreaming beyond next year is because they're just handcuffed, right? They've got the golden handcuffs. You have to keep your overhead low. I'm like, no. You have to keep your overhead at a reasonable rate, but no one would tell Google, Apple, or any of those guys to keep their overhead low. Overhead is the operations of your company. So,
Hmm.
people are like, well, I don't want to pay for overhead. I'm like, okay, well, staff is overhead. So who's going to deliver the programs?
Hmm.
Not robots, right?
Right.
Like, so do you want them to work in the dark without computers? Like, what overhead would you say is, luxurious? And, oh, well, the executive director is getting paid too much. I'm like, okay, well, what do you code as too much? What is too much? Well, $100,000. I said, well, what if they're running a $19 million agency? Well, then maybe six figures is okay. It's just so funny to like when you
Yeah.
start unpacking these beliefs held by the general populace about nonprofits. But you and I both know like we would be up the creek without a paddle if we didn't have nonprofits in this country.
Absolutely. There's a really great TEDx talk by a man named Dan Palota. It's probably,
Yes.
yeah, right. That talks about like nonprofit executive compensation, and to your point, nonprofits are the glue that pretty much holds the entire country together. So they should be paid for being that glue. And so I think that definitely agree with everything you said there.
Yeah, I love Dan's talk. And I used to teach a class on fundraising as part of the MPA program at Clark University here. And first night, that was how I opened the whole course, was
Hmm.
making them watch his talk. And before it, I would say, I want you to write down everything you know about nonprofits, right? And so at the end of the talk, I'd be like, I want you to look back at this list you just wrote and see how many of your beliefs or thoughts or attitudes about nonprofits are actually not true,
Hmm.
and they'd all be like, oh, but yeah, I love Dan. I was really lucky. I was able to facilitate a discussion of his film at a conference called Cause Camp right as he was coming out with the movie. So that was great to have people see that film and discuss it and become aware. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Dan's, and he's from Massachusetts, so bonus points.
Oh God.
uh,
We used to talk badly about Massachusetts, like down here in Philly, but you guys have been on a good run for the 21st century. Patriots and Bruins and Celtics and Red Sox and all the things. But Philly's gonna make a comeback at some point in time.
at some point, yeah. No, I spent my high school and college years right outside of Philly, and so I used to go to a lot of Phillies games at back when Vet Stadium was still there, and I went
Yep.
to a couple of Eagles games, and yeah, I was a big fan, but then I left, and had to migrate my preferences accordingly.
Fair, fair enough. Totally get it.
Yeah. Well, Dan, this has been so interesting and insightful and helpful. And I really want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day post vacation and spending some time with us talking about how to jigger our approach to do better with millennials.
Absolutely. I'm always glad to help. And I know there are a few questions. So if anyone wants to reach me, they can reach me at Dr. Dan Young 79 at gmail.com. That's just DrDanYoung 79 at gmail.com. And any friend of Sarah's is a friend of mine. Always glad to help wherever I can.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll make sure that we include your email with the transcript we send out, and so people can reach out to you. So thanks again for being here. And I'll be back in another 2 weeks with another episode of the Philanthropy Revolution. Just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Bye.
Bye.
Tuning in. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Got topics you want me to cover? Organizations you want me to showcase? Let me know. Also, I'm here to help you revolutionize philanthropy at your nonprofit. If you want to talk about what that looks like, drop me an email.